Almost every community has a church, no matter how small or big the community may be. Spiritual beliefs have been a foundation of civilization for millennia, and the sizes and number of a community's churches have long been an indication of cultural power and economic power. Yorkton has been the home of several major houses of worship, showing how culturally powerful the city has historically been.
I'm Hayden DeGrow, and I'm the Culture and Heritage Specialist for the City of Yorkton. I love learning history, and teaching people about Yorkton's past is a proud part of my job. Join me as I highlight fascinating people, places, and events from Yorkton's history and take you where these places can be found today. This is Yorkton Retold.
To start our story, we go to the start of Yorkton's story. We see in this historical photo of the Yorkton colony, the first iteration of church was established. Minister Allen Patterson, a Presbyterian missionary, set up his first practices in the homes of the early colonists, using their living rooms as his practice. When Yorkton moved to its current site, that's where the permanent places of worship had their own genesis. Once Yorkton was established here near the CPR rail lines, one of the first buildings constructed was, of course, a church. By this time, 3 different denominations of the church had arrived, and all of them during the same year, 1893. At first, the Presbyterian Church and the Anglican Church shared a building, holding their separate masses at different times on Sundays. In 1900, the Holy Trinity Anglican Church was built, making it official that the Anglicans were here to stay. That building, seen here in these photos, was a modest building that stood right here where this ATM vestibule stands today. This was not the last place where Anglicans held worship. As the city of Yorkton grew, the churches would grow as well. In 1928, a new Anglican church was constructed on Darlington Street between 2nd and 3rd Avenues. The church was much larger and offered a beautiful new hall to house their worships. However, a fire took their original parish building in 1940, and after this, they needed a replacement. At this time, the Royal Canadian Air Force was decommissioning their base outside of town, and the church decided to buy the old mess hall and moved it into town along 5th Avenue. In 1989, the Anglicans built a new church, replacing their 1928 building on the same location. We can see that church today in all its glory. Now that the Anglicans have been addressed, it's the Presbyterians' turn. As I mentioned earlier, that they shared the building with the Anglicans up until 1893. But where did they go from there? Well, right where this former restaurant now stands was once a holy site. As we can see in these photos, the Presbyterian community had one of the tallest buildings in Yorkton. The building housed about 100 worshippers and was one of the most prominent churches in early Yorkton. But just like their Anglican neighbors, the Presbyterians did not stick around in their original premises. In 1910, they moved their mass to a new building, St. Andrew's Church, which would be their home to this day, even after combining forces with the Methodists in 1925. But the unification of the two denominations would not spell the end of the Presbyterians. In 1950, the city of Yorkton saw the rise of a new congregation of the Presbyterian Church, and they were granted a new space in the south part of town. Located by Yorkton's water tower, this new church would be called Knox Presbyterian Church, and the church we see standing here would be completed by the winter of 1953. However, despite flourishing for many decades, the congregation began to shrink, and new members migrated to other churches. As a result, Knox Presbyterian Church closed down in 2021. Today, the Kin Club of Yorkton, one of the most dominant service clubs in the city, owns the church and uses it as its meeting place. The third denomination to arrive in Yorkton were the Methodists. Starting their own congregation in 1893, they originally held masses in a small church. However, the community was growing so much that the church decided that their own original building was being outgrown. They then were gifted land from the York Farmers Colonization Company and built a new church. The church we see here on the corner of Smith Street and 4th Avenue was that new building, opening its doors in 1900. Unfortunately, though, they did not stay long. In 1925, the Presbyterian and the Methodist denominations came together to form the United Church. The Presbyterians' new church was decided to be the new home for the Mass, while the Methodist church building was put up for sale. The Lutheran denomination, looking for their own house of worship, were the ones to purchase it, renaming it St. Paul's Lutheran Church. The Lutherans are another story entirely, and we'll describe them in just a second. The next church to arrive in Yorkton was the Baptist congregation. Beginning their own services in 1900, the interesting part of this church is that their home building has always been on the same intersection. That intersection, as we can see, is Smith Street and 3rd Avenue North. Starting on the southwest corner, the original church was a small and basic building, but still had remarkable stained glass windows. This church was the longest running church in Yorkton, lasting until 1955. In this year, Smith Street was decided to be expanded from a 2-lane to a divided 4-lane road, one of only 3 roads of such to be in Yorkton. However, several buildings on the corners of Smith Street were demolished, including the original Baptist church. As they were a religious group, the city offered lots across the street to the church. With this, the new current building we see today was built. However, this wouldn't be the only Baptist congregation to come to Yorkton. In 1910, Baptists from Germany arrived and set up their own church. This one located right here on the corner of Darlington Street and Betts Avenue. This church, named after the Central Baptist Church, it was the home of the Baptists for over 80 years, when the German Baptists moved over to a new area of Yorkton. As we now see here, the Central Baptist Church became the Heritage Baptist Church and was built in the mid-1990s. The church remains open to this day. Next, we arrive at one of the most prominent denominations, Catholicism. In a separate video, I described the history of Yorkton's first Catholic church, St. Mary's Ukrainian Catholic Church. And during that video, I mentioned that the founder of St. Mary's started with the founding of the Roman Catholic Church. Father Achille Delaire, who had arrived in Yorkton at the turn of the century, founded St. Gerard's Roman Catholic Church, naming it after the most prominent local pastor. The first building was constructed in 1905 right next to St. Mary's. This church would remain one of the most prominent buildings in Yorkton until its age began to catch up with it in the 1970s. To update their location, St. Gerard's moved to a space on 3rd Avenue, building a massive modern church that continues to house the Catholic congregation. Today, with the church celebrating 120 years in the city, St. Gerard's is still a dominant part of Yorkton's religious scene. Moving away from Christianity for a bit, let's talk about another one of the religions. In 1906, the Jewish community in Canada opened up a synagogue in Yorkton in the houses of their members. They built a permanent synagogue in 1912 on Betts Avenue, naming it the Shadi Shomayim Synagogue. Members of this congregation included the Crucian, Kroll, and Bronfman families, all highly notable and successful business owners in the local community. But this also meant that one of its worshippers was one of Yorkton's most notorious citizens, Harry Bronfman. Bronfman, though, was a staunch Jewish man and honored their rules. This is why, while he stretched laws and poked holes in a few of them, he never outright broke them in ways that his gangster contemporaries did. When he was forced to move away from Yorkton, Bronfman still sent money back to his synagogue. When Bronfman passed away in 1963, he sent away his final amount in his will, a $5,000 endowment to keep the place afloat. That is more than $51,000 in today's money. However, Bronfman didn't know how bad things were getting for his former synagogue. While in 1920, an addition was made to accommodate the Hebrew school, the Jewish population in Yorkton unfortunately had already peaked by the 1940s. By the time the 1960s had rolled around, most Jewish people in Yorkton had followed the same path as Bronfman and had moved out of town. The membership had reached a low enough point that the synagogue didn't even have its own rabbi. Instead, cantors were brought in from surrounding cities to facilitate the remaining congregation. By 1976, the congregation had become almost entirely female, which caused the synagogue to completely shut down. After a few years of having its ornate Gothic arch windows vandalized, the building was purchased to be used as a clothing distribution center by the Salvation Army. When this moved out of the 1990s, The building was converted into a multi-unit rental building, earning its current look. Moving from one interesting religious group to another, we arrive at a group that is not always seen as a religious group, the Salvation Army. Many people would think that this army is just a charity group that takes in food, clothing, and other household donations and gives them back to the less fortunate. And while that is what they're best known for, it is not entirely correct either. In fact, the Salvation Army is indeed a religious group, basing their beliefs on the Methodist Evangelical Church. The Salvation Army itself is an international organization that, yes, does provide social services for people in its congregation areas. Yorkton's congregation arrived in 1913 with its first unofficial meeting held in a building on Broadway. In 1917, an Army Hall was built on 2nd Avenue, with the first official meetings there coming in at that point. By the 1950s, the Salvation Army decided that, with the city growing substantially, they needed to find a better place to mingle themselves with the people they were helping. While they decided on a new location, they briefly moved their hall to 41 Betts Avenue. Finally, they discovered the perfect place, Smith Street and Ontario Avenue. The spot was right in the middle of the newly expanding western neighborhoods. They opened their new hall in 1967, dedicating it on January 14th of that year. Unfortunately, the Salvation Army would be hit with a massive problem by the 1970s. At this time, the city of Yorkton wanted to redirect Smith Street to connect with a bypass that was being built for Highway 16. To do this, they turned Smith Street northwards, cutting off the street that the Salvation Army Citadel was sitting on. However, with many houses still on the street and still having connections with Gladstone and Maple Avenues, the city kept the original street in place. Its street name was originally Smith Street West, but would soon become known better with the Salvation Army. As the construction for the new Smith Street was being done, a massive fire consumed the Tremaine and Candlewood apartment buildings in December of 1974. Victim relief services were done by the Salvation Army, giving the people that were displaced a place to stay, clothe, and food. In gratitude for this help, and their nearly 60 years of service, the city of Yorkton renamed the street that their citadel was on Booth Street, after the founder of the Salvation Army, William Booth. Today, the Army still holds weekly services and is one of the most prominent groups in Yorkton. As we speak, they are transitioning to a new building, the former Parkland Community Church, located on South Front Street. Coming back to more mainstream religious groups, the next church to arrive on the Yorkton scene was the Orthodox Church. With the dominant Ukrainian population in the Yorkton area, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church set up a congregation in 1920. At first, they were meeting in local members' houses, but in 1924, the congregation acquired the lot at 78 First Avenue. Demolishing the building that was there at the time and recycling the pieces, the church built its first true home, calling it the Ukrainian Reading Social Hall. As Greek immigrants arrived during this time, the Orthodox Church welcomed them in with their congregation, naming themselves the Holy Transfiguration of the Ukrainian Greek Orthodox Church. In 1926, the church was realizing that its hall was being outgrown. They then moved to a new space at Wellington Avenue and Duncan Street, once again recycling lumber for their building, this time from a collapsed grain elevator. However, even this did not last too long. In the 1960s, a new place was built, this time a large space that was meant to remain the home of the Orthodox Church for years. This new place was located at Bradbrook Drive and Independence Street and is currently one of the most iconic churches in Yorkton. In 1924, another small congregation arrived in Yorkton. This one was the Apostolic Church, and they held their first meetings in Yorkton's Town Hall before renting a space to hold further meetings. At the time, there was a partner congregation in the neighboring community of Springside, known as the Springside Valley Church, while Yorkton's was just known as the Yorkton Apostolic Church. The Yorkton congregation built their first permanent location at the corner of Agricultural Avenue and Broadway Street. In 1958, the church amalgamated its two congregations into one, turning the land they had in Springside into a religious camp. With this addition, the church began to outgrow their space and they sought a new one. In 1966, they built a new church at the corner of Gladstone Avenue South and King Street. Their vacated space on Broadway would become the Dairy Queen parking lot we see today. The building they moved into was highly useful, but the apostolic congregation began to decline in the 1980s as Yorkton itself began to decline due to its economy. The church eventually closed, becoming one of the few churches to do so in Yorkton. Today, the building is occupied by Extravagance Dance Studios. Yorkton's Evangelical Church officially arrived in the city in 1931. And while the Salvation Army is sometimes associated with the church, this isn't an independent congregation from them. At first, they rented a vacant store space for their meetings while they raised money to build a proper church. This later became a vacant school building, and during this time, the congregation was officially recognized, with 10 initial charter members. Their first official church was built at the corner of Franklin Avenue and Broadway Street, and a place they finally moved into in 1953. While they do remain here today, naming their church the Yorkton Christian Fellowship, they are no longer alone in Yorkton. A partner of their congregation was the Dominion Chapel Ministry, located across the street from the Holy Transfiguration Church. Also in 1931, the Lutheran Church founded another congregation in Yorkton. Named the Zion Lutheran Church, it was founded by 12 founding fathers in the St. Paul's congregation. While St. Paul's was doing well with the expanding city, a second congregation was seen as needed. Holding its meetings in 1939, their church was located on Betts Avenue. This congregation grew rapidly, going from 71 people to 335 by just 1954. At this time, the church decided to renovate their current building, but even with this, their numbers kept growing, so they built a new church in 1960, holding their first meeting in 1961. This church, made to look like the upturned sides of Noah's Ark, is located at the corner of Independence Street and Elizabeth Avenue, and it is still open to the public today. One of the newest denominations of Christianity that arrived in Yorkton was Jehovah's Witnesses. They arrived in 1944, and like most of their predecessors, they began their meetings in the houses of their members. They did this before they began renting various spaces around town. A permanent place for the church was built in 1955 at 17 Laurier Avenue, named the Yorkton Kingdom Hall. This location proved difficult and too small for the Jehovah's Witnesses and their growing group, so they decided to move their hall to a new building at 109 Maple Avenue. Later on, Jehovah's Witnesses moved out from this location, leaving it to the Destiny International Christian Assembly. Their new space, found at Allenbrook and Queen Street, is one of the newest churches in Yorkton, built in the 2010s. The Seventh-day Adventist Church is one of the lesser-known Christian denominations, but that is not saying they do not have a prominent part in Yorkton. The founders of Yorkton's congregation emigrated across Canada from Hampton, Ontario to Yorkton, and they brought their unique beliefs to the city. The first meetings of the congregation were, you guessed it, held in its members' homes. In 1956, the first church was built at Broadway Street and Lincoln Avenue. This church was renovated over the years, but still remained the home of the Seventh-day Adventists for years. In the 1980s, though, they chose to move to a new space located at the corner of Gladstone Avenue South and Queen Street. Their former location was modified into a retail space, being the home to an electronics store until the mid-2010s, when it became the Yorkton Martial Arts Training Center. Another thing that some people could say is a religion. Westview United Church is unique among Yorkton's religious scene. Opening its doors in 1962, it was actually founded by the congregation of St. Andrew's United Church. Now, I know that sounds a little weird, but let me explain. The reason for this was because the congregation at St. Andrew's was getting very large, and while other churches had built new buildings, St. Andrew's did not want to move from their historic building. To alleviate the problem, they split their congregation area, with the new building being named the Westview United Church. The new building is located near the Yorkton Hospital on Bradbrook Drive and is still connected with St. Andrew's. As the Greek Orthodox community expanded in Yorkton, they felt a need for their own space. In the 1990s, the community bought up the original and then vacant Central Baptist Church and set up their own congregation. They named the church the St. Anagiroi Greek Orthodox Church, with the name referencing two holy healers that treated people with no pay. Another Orthodox congregation also moved in, named St. Mark the Evangelist Orthodox Church. Named after the famous author of the Gospel of Mark, the church shares space with its partners. While not as dominant or well known as the colossal churches in Yorkton, it still offers a strong part of the cultural fabric of the city. One of the most subtly displayed places of worship in Yorkton is the local Islamic mosque. Located here at 17 First Avenue North, it looks from the outside like any storefront. But inside, it is a beautiful example of Islamic decoration, with rich green carpets and glass globe lights. Opening their doors to the Islamic community in the early 2000s, they today host the 5 daily prayers for those of the Muslim faith. Today, they offer a promising part of Yorkton's cultural landscape and are regular contributors to Yorkton's Culture Days. While that takes care of the prominent historic places of worship in Yorkton, this clearly means that there are other places in town. This includes the Yorkton Alliance Church, the Family Worship Center, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the Pentecostal Church, the Yorkton Dream Center, the Dominion Chapel Church, Jesus is Lord Church, and the Yorkton Victory Church. Each of these has a story alongside them, and while their stories are shorter than the ones we've discussed, they are still worth mentioning, of course. One other church that I have not mentioned that no longer exists was the Church of the Nazarene, and while their building still exists as the Dominion Chapel Ministry, the church itself no longer meets in Yorkton. It is clear that, with this high amount of religious organization, Yorkton is one of the most cultural cities in Saskatchewan. I hope you all liked what I've discussed here. If I missed any places of worship, or missed any facts of the places of worship I've discussed, please let me know in the comments. But please be kind. We do not need to start any problems on this video.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment. See you next time, history buffs.